The following program contains shocking assertions of truth. If you suffer from relativism, Randall may not be right for you. Check with your local guru.
Standing for truth in the four corners of America. Fighting for justice on the frontiers of the culture wars. And turning resistance into an art form. Men enough to walk his cat. Randall Terry.
Hey, what are you looking at?
Some people call me a clown. I prefer a fool for Christ. Welcome to today's program, ladies and gentlemen. We begin part number 2 of our 5-part series on Sharia law. Before we go any further, however, I think we need to go to the rock and roll queen, Jihad Rani.
Allah Akbar. Good morning, boys and girls. You know, good Muslim, I love peace. I wish peace everywhere in world. If only people submit everywhere to Allah, then we have peace everywhere. Peace from Mecca to Cordoba house to your house.
Welcome to the program, friend. There's an awful lot of talk today about Sharia law. Most people have never even heard the words Sharia law until very recently. Most of us have no knowledge what it's all about, Alfie. This series of programs is dedicated to bringing you an introduction to Sharia law. It is a comprehensive introduction, but it is just that, an introduction, so that we can begin the discussion on just what a threat Sharia law is to the principles of life and liberty that undergird the United States of America. I hope you enjoy this, and I hope that you encourage your friends to watch either on television or go back and catch the episodes on terrycast.com. Let's go into Sharia law. Hi, friend. I'm Randall Terry. In this session, we're going to talk about Sharia law. What is it? Where did it come from? What are its elements? As you know, we've been studying the life of Muhammad, his words and his deeds that are not in the Quran, properly called the Hadith, or the Sunnah, or the traditions of Muhammad. Well, I'm going to give you a very quick working definition of what Sharia law is now, and then we're going to take a step back and look at the development of Sharia law, how human rights are being abused in nations that practice Sharia law, and ultimately what it is going to take to free the men and women who live under the shadow, the heel, really the sword of Sharia law. Sharia law basically is this. It's the Quran and the Hadith and the Sunnah, the traditions of Muhammad, together enforced by the force of law or by the sword. Muhammad did this. For example, Muhammad ordered people to be murdered or executed who satirized him. So under Sharia law, in an Islamic nation, it is against the law to satirize Muhammad. So again, the simplest kind of bumper sticker definition of Sharia law is this. The Quran and the words and deeds of Muhammad that are not in the Quran, created, codified, and then enforced by the sword. I'm going to make one other statement. It's very critical that you remember this. Islam, if the sword is taken out of its hand, would perish of its own weight. In substance, Islam is a Catholic heresy. In form, it is a revival of the pagan Greco-Roman civil religious structure. In other words, if you were in the countries of Greece or under Roman authority, you had to believe in the political head, but you also had to believe in their gods. And if you denied their gods, you were liable to banishment, imprisonment, some kind of suffering, or even execution. So when Christianity came and ultimately broke the back of the Greco-Roman deities, the ability for the state to compel somebody to worship those pagan deities was over, because the sword had been taken out of the pagan god's hands. Now we name our dogs Caesar. We name our sneakers Nike. We name our cars that'll rust Saturn. The names of these deities that made the world tremble, we don't even recognize that they were, that when we use them in everyday parlance, we don't even recognize that this was a part of the fiber of government that made men fear for their lives. Likewise, Islam. If the sword were taken out of its hand, the ability to compel men to believe, to obey, I think it would die of its own weight. So, what we're going to do in this section now is we're going to talk about whether or not Sharia law is compatible with basic human rights, the human rights of freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, and freedom of expression. That's very critical, to express what you believe. Now, as I said, you hear a lot about Sharia law in these days, and my goal now is to give you both background and definitions of Sharia law from the mouths of Muslim scholars. It's critical that we let Islam speak for itself. And then when that has happened, we will see, well, is Sharia law incompatible, completely incompatible with basic human rights? The human rights of freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and expression. Now, there's a philosophical question we also want to ask, and that is this: can a government legitimately force individuals to give up their right to decide or choose their thoughts, their religion, or how they express themselves on those matters? Now, I want you to please take fair warning. Be advised. Our Western and American and Judeo-Christian understanding of human rights, God-given human rights, our understanding is radically different from those of the Muslim world. For example, our Declaration of Independence states, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident means we don't even need to discuss it. Everyone knows this is true. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, this is where we really take a different tack than the Islamic world. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. That, my friends, is the talk of revolution. Now, the words that I just read, which are embedded in our concepts and our laws concerning freedom, are completely foreign to Islamic philosophy and Islamic Sharia law. We'll be right back with more on Sharia law.
Why is it that when you have been looking for something for hours, you find it in the last place you look? Could it be that it's because when you find it, you quit looking?
Moments with Moses. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the field.
All right, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the quiz. What are the two main undergirding foundations of Sharia law? Do you remember them? All right, let's watch more of the series. One other question we need to ask on a philosophical plane is this: can the leaders of nations decide what the religious practice or beliefs of their people will be? Now, if someone answers yes, then basically you have consigned those people to be subjects, not free men and women, but subjects, even slaves. The Western philosopher John Locke, who many of you remember from your college studies, he's had great influence on the West. He strenuously taught that the natural law, God-given right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion could not be abridged. It couldn't be taken away. It could not even be surrendered to earthly sovereigns, even by majority consent. He said, and I quote, "The care of souls is not committed to the civil magistrate, any more than to other men. It is not committed unto them, I say, by God, because it appears not that God has ever given any such authority to one man over another as to compel anyone to his religion. Nor can any such power be vested in the magistrate by the consent of the people." Now that's completely contrary to Islamic law. They compel, as we saw in one of the earlier episodes. Abu Bakr said, Muhammad came and forced people when necessary to accept his religion. Muhammad said, Allah put a sword in my hand to ensure that none but him was worshipped. You see, if the sword is taken away from Muhammad's hand, Islam can no longer be compelled upon men and women. Now, fortunately for us, at least in the West, the axiom that man has certain God-given unalienable rights has prevailed in word and deed in the leading powers of the earth. One more thing I want to discuss with you by way of background is this: Nuremberg and Westphalia. Stretch back in your memory to the Treaty of Westphalia. Westphalia was the treaty that was signed in 1648, which ended the religious wars. Now, the immediate fruit of it was good, because Christians were no longer killing Christians. Protestant kings sending armies into Catholic lands, Catholic princes sending armies into Protestant lands, trying to compel religious belief. So the Treaty of Westphalia was a great blessing to stop the religious wars concerning the effort to compel people to embrace one Christian religion or another. But the long-term fruit has been worse and worse until the Nuremberg trials. Now, I'm going to give you a quick synopsis. I invite you to do further study on your own. And again, for those of you who love history, you'll remember some of this. For some of you, this is going to be new. But it's actually really critical because of the issues of policy, the policy issues of the U.S. government. The Westphalian system basically says every nation is its own sovereign entity, and as long as it doesn't go outside of its borders and bring harm to another sovereign nation, it can pretty much do whatever it wants internally. I hope you're starting to see why Sharia law is incompatible with basic human rights. I'll be right back. Well, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, there are people in this world that are committed to taking away your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Geronimo, what do you think about people who try to take away your guns?
I think they can have them. Bullets first.
The first duty of a university is to teach wisdom, not trade, character, not technicalities. Sir Winston Churchill.
Welcome back to the program, friend. Let's continue with our series on Sharia law. Now, you might wonder, why did we sit by and do nothing in Rwanda when the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of people took place? Why do we sit by when we know that there is horrifying atrocities happening? Why did we defeat Saddam Hussein in Gulf War I, But then when we knew that he was slaughtering the Kurds, we did nothing. We could have stopped him, but we did nothing. It's the Westphalian system. That we will not breach your border to stop you from what you do, Mr. Tyrant, as long as you don't export it. So, in my opinion, and I know in the opinion of most Americans, not all, but most, this is reprehensible. It's like knowing that the neighbor next door is brutalizing women and children in his house. You can hear their screams. But you say, well, you know, it's in his house. You know, you look through the window and you see him stabbing someone. Say, well, nothing I can do about it. It's his house. The Westphalian system is being corrupted and perverted right now, but it's collapsing. And I say thankfully. And what breached that wall were the Nuremberg trials. As you know, after World War II, both in Germany and in the Pacific Rim, the leaders of Germany and Japan were tried as criminals. All right? I'm going to talk more about this in a little bit, but the quick overview is this. The leaders of the victorious powers said, you committed crimes inside of your own country prior to the war, and we're going to try you for those crimes. Crimes against humanity. These are crimes that are committed against the natural law that go all the way back to Cain and Abel, with a clear reference to Mosaic law, the laws of God. The victorious powers actually said this because they all recognized that the Westphalian guarantee that you can do whatever you want inside of your own borders and no one can say anything, that somehow that was inherently unjust, that they couldn't leave those victims without rights and those perpetrators of crimes without responsibility and justice for what they did. So, as we go forward talking about Sharia law, this haunting question begins to emerge. Well, what do we do about what happens in another country, about the suffering of innocent people in another country? Do we just look the other way? Or do we have some level of responsibility? The book, International Law, Cases and Commentary, says, and I quote, in the light of the atrocities of Nazi Germany, it would have been reprehensible to leave victims without legal rights and perpetrators without legal obligations. The lesson of Nuremberg is that there are individual international rights and obligations that transcend state boundaries. The Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal used the principles of natural law and revealed law when they prosecuted Nazi war criminals. In fact, as I alluded to a minute ago, the U.S. prosecutor said he was reaching back to law as old as Cain and Abel, clearly referring to Genesis and to Mosaic law. In other words, even many of us who don't like the idea of international law in our hearts know that it exists, a law over all nations, because we believe that we have God-given rights. Those rights come from the laws of God, the laws of nature and nature's God, and they cannot be taken away. And if a nation takes away those rights, like the Nazis did, it is the right, and maybe it points the duty of other nations to bring them to justice. Well, after World War II, the Nuremberg trials, defining and defending human rights brought a significant number of treaties. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Human Rights, the Genocide Convention, a great treaty, the European Convention on Human Rights, the American Declaration on the Rights and Duties of Man, the Helsinki Accords, just to name a few. Is Sharia law incompatible with basic human rights? If you haven't figured it out yet, you will by the time this entire series is done. Don't go away, I'll be right back.
May the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord, and let not the sin of his mother be blotted out. Let them be before the Lord continually, and may his memory be cut off from the earth. For he did not remember to show kindness, but pursued the poor and needy, and the brokenhearted to their death.
Friend, if you and I are going to stand against the slow but steady intrusion of Sharia law and the incursion of the enemy into our freedoms, we've got to know what we're talking about. We produced a 10-part series for you called What Would Muhammad Do? If you want to get that series, which I urge you to do, you can have it for a gift of any size, any size. Just go to terrycast.com and put in your order. You'll be glad you did.